Hello, hello. The good old crew is here. Very nice.
Your favorite troublemakers.
I would expect nothing less.
Of
2 days
course.
in a row. Lucky me.
A challenge is a challenge. I'm not keeping score though, so I don't know who's winning.
Oh, well, that's good. Well, we keep score in about a month at Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. That's when those scales will come out. That's when
Right.
that's when it's really, really happening. Uh, Hello, everyone. Feel free to be off video, on video, however you prefer. Um, we'll get started in 1 minute or so. I am going to put I put together a source sheet, and so I am going to put the link to it in the chat. So if you want to follow along, uh, it'll make it easier for you guys to know what we're doing. And I will also share my screen, but in the meantime, everyone should have just seen that link. So feel free to download that or have it on your screen, so you can, if you have that capability. And we'll get. Did everyone get that? Hi, Miriam. You have a question?
Yes, I want to ask this. We're still unmuted. I'll mute myself. Jeff, really?
Sorry?
No, I need his phone number and I'll get it later.
Oh, okay.
Or if he would, but he's unmuted.
Tomorrow I'm reading this portion of the Torah in the temple here on Zoom.
Oh, nice.
Okay.
Are you how much of it are you going to be reading?
Probably, since it's Zoom and it's a relatively difficult group, probably the first 6 lines after Tzedek, Tzedek.
Turdov.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. We're going to be looking at that line
That's a
today.
mazel tov, Jeff. Mazel tov.
Thank you.
Jeff, can you give me your phone number quickly before we start?
You want my phone number? Is that what you're saying? You're a little garbled there. I couldn't get that.
Oh, can I have your phone number, Jeff?
Well, I
Well,
don't want to
yeah.
pass it around, Miriam.
Here, you know what, Jeff? You can put it in the chat. Put it in the
Okay.
chat directly to Miriam, and that
Okay.
way only she sees it.
There
Or
we
you
go.
can share with all
I
of us.
can leave my email to you, Jeff. You want it?
All right, so Miriam, he's going to put it in the chat so that you can have access to that. Okay, we're going to get started. Welcome, good afternoon, or good noon, and Shabbat Shalom to everyone. Now we all have Jeff's phone number.
Oh,
Jeff,
I guess,
beware.
Sorry, I didn't know how to limit it.
Beware of what you say. Now we can just
Now we're in
text
trouble.
you and
Aye,
call
aye.
you at all hours of the
Aye,
day,
aye,
except for
aye, aye.
tomorrow morning when you're
Yeah, no,
chanting
I'm
Torah.
studying tomorrow.
Yeah. Okay. So on this format of Zoom, since we're in the meeting format as opposed to the webinar format, just remember to keep yourself muted until you want to say something, of course, and then you can either physically raise your hand or you can unmute yourself and share your thoughts. Of course, there's also the chat, so you can write something in the chat as well if you're thinking about something as we're going through. We're going to look at a few different sections from this week's Torah portion. For those who came in a little later, this again is the source sheet that I just put in the chat, so you can have that accessible, but I'll also share my screen as we go through this today. So let's begin with the blessing for engaging in the study of Torah. Feel free to join me. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Praised are you, Adonai, our God, ruler of the universe, who commands us to engage in the study of Torah. Amen.
Amen.
Okay, Shoftim, great Torah portion. Some fascinating passages. This is actually my wife's and my father-in-law's Torah portion from their bar and bat mitzvahs. So lots of good stuff that I want us to dig into. We're not going to get to all of it. I went through and I picked out a few pieces from this portion that I thought we could spend a little bit more time in, and so we're gonna jump right in. Shoftim being judges. This is a section of Deuteronomy as we're nearing the end of the entire Torah. Since, by the way, it is Rosh Chodesh Elul, we are now in the month of Elul, so I hope your preparation begins today for the high holidays. This is a section all about laws and about justice. I don't know about you, but I listened to Joe Biden's speech last night, and I keyed in. Maybe it's because I knew I was going to be teaching today, or maybe it's just what's happening in the world, the use of the word justice, which occurred many times throughout his speech. So I want us to start with the famous passage from this week's Torah portion that says, justice, justice, you shall pursue. So from Deuteronomy 16, 18 through 20, it says, you shall appoint magistrates and officials for your tribes in all the settlements that the Lord your God is giving you, and they shall govern the people with due justice. All right, already setting up a justice system, already setting up a system of courts and a way in which justice can be given out to the community. You shall not judge unfairly. You shall show no partiality. You shall not take bribes, for bribes blind the eyes of the discerning and upset the plea of the just. Justice, justice shall you pursue, or as I highlighted in the Hebrew, tzedek, tzedek tirdof, that you may thrive and occupy the land that the Lord your God is giving you. Okay, so famous line, of course, tzedek and the word tzedakah. We're not going to spend too much time on this, but you probably already are all aware of the link between this idea of tzedakah and tzedek, the fact that there is no word for charity in our tradition, that what we usually use when we usually translate tzedakah as charity, that's not an appropriate translation, because really at the key is this idea of tzedek, of justice. So of course the question that is asked by some of the rabbis is why this repetition of the word tzedek, right? You could have just said, the Torah could have just said tzedek tirdof, justice you shall pursue. So why does it repeat itself, and why does it have it twice, right? And usually when something is repeated in the Torah, a word or a phrase, that is to give us a sense that there's an extra importance, right? It's laden with a significance that goes beyond just the use of one word. So any ideas as to why this is repeated? Any thoughts from anyone? Why, of all the things, would the word tzedek be repeated here? Yeah, Susan.
Well, not to pursue it, first of all, with emphasis, but also not to pursue it unjustly. Do the means justify the ends, or the ends justify the means, actually? So that's one possibility. Okay,
so that so let me try and understand. So that the repetition of the word tzedek is to emphasize the fact that we must constantly be pursuing this?
Yes, that's the key thing. But then also, how about pursuing? This is at time with saying, pursue it justly. So that the means are in confirmation with the ends as well.
Okay, great. So that what comes right before it in the verse right before, where it talks about you shall govern with justice, you shall not judge unfairly, you shall not show partiality. That is saying that not only do you need to pursue justice, but you need to do it in a way that we just articulated in the verse right before this, right? That there needs to be a just way in which you pursue justice. Okay, great. Any other ideas? Okay, well, the rabbis have some ideas, so I have them on our source sheet. So let's look at some of the ideas that they have, and see what we take from them. Okay, so Ibn Ezra, who is a famous commentator, says, "Justice, justice." He's saying Scripture addresses the litigants. The word appears twice because one must pursue justice, whether it be to one's gain or to one's loss, or the repetition denotes time after time, all the days of your life, or for emphasis. Okay, so he's suggesting a few different reasons why justice is being repeated here. And by the way, as we're reading through this, there isn't one right answer for this. So what I'm hoping that you do is start to see what's your understanding of the emphasis being put in our tradition behind this word justice. Why is it repeated? What do you connect with? So here we have this idea that the first reason that it's repeated, possibly, is that you need to pursue justice whether it's going to benefit you or not, right? So the repeating of the word is to suggest that whether justice number one is for your gain or justice number two, it goes against you, regardless, you need to pursue it. Or that the repetition denotes that over and over again, you must pursue justice, that you must not assume that justice is something that you must do at one particular time. But it's an entire mentality. It's a way in which you are supposed to view the world and view your place in the world, and that you are constantly supposed to be going after justice in whatever you do, whether it's to your benefit or not. Or as he says in the final end, just for emphasis, which we had talked about before. Jeff, you're muted. Well, we can't hear you, Jeff.
Justice is to be pursued in spite of your personal biases, needs, or thoughts. In other words, it is neutral to you and is an ideal regardless of how it affects you or your understanding.
Great. It is something that goes beyond our own personal needs, and it is much bigger than us. And that if we're getting caught up in justice purely as it relates to our own lives, we're missing a significant piece of what justice is supposed to be and what our tradition is suggesting our pursuit is towards, that it's not necessarily even has anything to do with us. That there are plenty of people and plenty of groups, as we know, in the world who need support, and we have no direct connection to them, and yet we still have a responsibility to pursue justice for those people as well. We have another interpretation here that we get from the Talmud, from Sanhedrin 32b, and it says, as it is taught in a Baraita, in a story, when the verse states, justice, justice shall you follow, one mention of justice is stated with regard to judgment, and one is stated with regard to compromise. Okay, so before we go further, justice part one, the first time it's suggested, it has to do with judgment and how you judge people, more in a court setting, not you're judgmental of people. And then the second use of the word justice has to do with compromise. So then they're going to explain this. How so? Where there are two boats traveling on the river and they encounter each other, if both of them attempt to pass, both of them sink, as the river is not wide enough for both to pass. If they pass one after the other, both of them pass. And similarly, where there are two camels who are ascending the ascent of Beit Horon, where there is a narrow steep path, and they encounter each other, if both of them attempt to ascend, both of them fall. If they ascend one after the other, both of them ascend. Okay, so we have here this idea that justice, the reason it's repeated is part of this idea of justice is how you go about judgment and how you do so, as it's stated in Deuteronomy 16:19, that you should not judge unfairly, that you should show no partiality, that judgment has a certain role, but that there's another piece of justice that's really important. And actually, if you think about that Talmud passage we just looked at, the majority of their time is spent on the second piece, which is compromise. And I think very clearly this is something that we all need to be thinking about these days. Because I feel like we're in a time where people are less likely to compromise and are more willing to kind of stand their ground. But here our tradition is saying that part of justice is recognizing compromise and is recognizing that when there is no compromise built in to the pursuit of justice, where we come from different perspectives on an issue, if we aren't willing to sit down at the table, and if we are trying to literally go at each other, as it suggests, these two boats in the water or camels going up a mountainside, that leads to disaster and destruction, and not just to the justice system, but leads to the destruction of the community structure as it exists. So that seems to be another way we can understand justice. Thoughts on this? David, you have to unmute.
I was sort of backtracking a little bit. It, isn't Deuteronomy understood to be spoken by Moses? And so justice, it feels rhetorical. It feels like a guy speaking. So before all this other stuff, there's a voice that comes through. It's what Moses would say, not just what the rules are. And I think what's so interesting in Deuteronomy is you keep coming back to this stuff of a guy talking to the people. And it has real power, sort of pre-intellectual power. Just
Good. So tell me more. What do you mean by because you're suggesting that there is, as you said, there's a power that comes from the fact that this feels as though it's more personal, or it feels like it's a conversation between Moses and the Jewish people as opposed to just a declaration. Where do you find power in that? Where is the power in that? How can you articulate that? And how do you then relate that to the lives in our lives today? Do you think there's a parallel in what you seem to be suggesting about Moses and what we should be thinking about in terms of how we talk today?
Well, I take the rhetorical point, the first point, from the repetition, because it's the kind of thing an individual stressing a point would do. It's just a way of speaking. And when you read this sentence that it's in, even in English, it has a spoken power. So that's where I get the idea that it's Moses' voice. The second part of it is Moses is basically going over everything that's happened to the to Jewish people in the last 40 plus years, right? So it's that voice of a guy trying to get them to root themselves in their own history and what's right about their history. And then you can go and analyze it, break it down and build it up and slice it in all sorts of different angles. But you got to get, first of all, this is what happened to all of us together. And this is what you got to be attentive to.
Great. I think about how sometimes the most powerful ways in which we speak to one another is when it's purely done in a way as though you are either relaying your own history or you're reminding people that they're part of something, as opposed to a declaration which may feel more formal. What I'm getting from what you're saying is this idea that when you can speak to people in a way that is authentic to you, just as you're suggesting, the way this is as if Moses was just speaking to people. There's an authenticity with our voices. And here, what you're keying in on, David, is the idea that this is the authentic voice of Moses coming through as he's trying to relay a history for these people. And I think similarly for us today, how can we make sure that when we are speaking to one another, when we are communicating in general, how can we make sure that we are authentic with our voice, right? Some of the things that were being said after Joe Biden's speech last night and some of the commentators was the idea that there was actually something really powerful about the fact that there wasn't an audience there. And actually for all the speeches this week, that it felt like a fireside chat, or it felt like someone was talking directly to you as opposed to waiting for applause lines or applause responses. And that there's a different authenticity that can come through when we speak in a way that feels more direct and natural than when we feel like we're trying to be performative. Okay, yeah, Jeff, you had a comment as well?
I like the distinction when you say tzedek in two areas. The first tzedek meaning absolute justice, statute, and law. The second, though, may be even more important in our comment about compromise, that justice between people in different ventures or whatever is not necessarily absolute, but it can be a win-win for both sides if applied in a fair-handed way. That justice is alive and needs to be defined in human terms between people, so that there's the element of law and order and absolute, and then there's the order that as it applies between humans. Justice is not necessarily absolute in one direction or the other, but compromise is the successful route to achieve justice between people with compromising issues.
Great. Thank you. Love that. Any other thoughts on this passage of tzedek tirdof, either on any of the things that we read or any other thoughts on the concept of tzedek or justice? No? Okay. Let's keep going then. We're moving on now to chapter 20. We move in this Torah portion from this idea of judgment and justice into starting to look at the section that we're going to look at, the rules of war and how do you engage in war. And there's some interesting passages there that I wanted us to look at. The first one is right here, Deuteronomy 21 through 9. So I'll read through it. And then you'll notice here that there are certain people who are permitted to leave the battlefield for certain reasons. So I want you to be thinking about what are those reasons and why. Why would our tradition single out these people for these particular reasons for them to be able to leave the battlefield? Okay, so when you take the field against your enemies and see horses and chariots, forces larger than yours, have no fear of them, for the Lord your God, who brought you from the land of Egypt, is with you. Before you join battle, the priest shall come forward and address the troops. He shall say to them, Hear, O Israel, by the way, it's the same Shema Yisrael, you are about to join battle with your enemy. Let not your courage falter. Do not be in fear, or in panic, or in dread of them. For it is the Lord your God who marches with you to do battle for you against your enemy to bring you victory. Right? That's the battle cry speech. That's the moment before they go into battle. Then the officials shall address the troops as follows. Is there anyone who has built a new house but has not dedicated it? Let him go back to his home, lest he die in battle and another dedicate it. Is there anyone who has planted a vineyard but has never harvested it? Let him go back to his home, lest he die in battle and another harvest it. Is there anyone who has paid the bride price for a wife, but who has not yet married her? Let him go back to his home, lest he die in battle and marry another, and another marry her. The officials shall go on addressing the troops and say, Is there anyone afraid and disheartened? Let him go back to his home, lest the courage of his comrades flag like his. When the officials have finished addressing the troops, army commanders shall assume command of the troops. Okay, really interesting. The priest comes up, delivers this rousing, speech to get the troops all ready to go into battle. God is behind you. God is by your side. God is the one who led you out of Egypt. If you can survive that, you're going to be able to survive this. Have faith. And then, as soon as that speech is done, the commanders say, but before we go any further, there are a few people who need to decide whether or not they actually should be here. And those people are, one, do you have a home that you haven't dedicated? Do you have a vineyard that you have never plowed or never harvested? And do you have a woman who you're engaged to back home and you haven't actually married her yet? If you fall into any of those categories, you need to leave right now. And finally, even if you don't fit into those three categories, there's one more category of people who do not belong here. And those who feel as though they don't have the courage to go through with this, please go home. Okay, so why? Of all the things and of all the different categories of people who should be required almost, basically they are commanded to leave the battlefield and go home, not to stay there. Why these things, and what is the Torah trying to teach us about these three categories? Jeff.
In the case of the first two examples, the home and the vineyard, one of the greatest elements and issues is the inheritance of the land and its direct possession by the legitimate owners of the land by inheritance from the past desert dwelling. In the third case, the great idea about establishing a lineage, having a child who will inherit your land. It has to do with identity and the obligation to maintain your inheritance of this land and to be able to pass it on genetically to your heirs. All these things are so important in the Israelites occupying the land of Israel and maintaining it.
Great. Good. Other thoughts on these categories and why they are called out? Yeah, David.
No, it's not exclusively so, but these three categories express a sort of fabric of normal life. of land
yes.
and harvesting and a wife. And it's a sort of reminder in a way that this is what we're fighting for, is that you're fighting to preserve and protect a way of life. Again, it may end up being rules and regulations and things like that. Now, the fourth one is it doesn't necessarily fit that. It's an interesting sort of asterisk on this. But that's what I read it as, is like you're fighting. We have to respect the life. And by sending people home, we are expressing that respect.
Good, good, wonderful. Yes, there are three things that come before war and come above anything else, which is your home, your vitality, not just in financially, but your sustainability of your own home with your work and your family, right? So that above going to war, above the idea of bringing destruction to others, whether they deserve it or not, the first thing you have to do is you have to get your home in order, so to speak, right? The major priority of our tradition lies in the fact that the home comes first, and what happens in the home, whether that's your work or your family, you can put home under a broader umbrella concept, that is the priority above all else. And even if you are on the battlefront, I mean, you imagine if you are a warrior and first you get the speech from the priest saying you're going to go out there, and then, right, it's also, I think, an interesting structure of how these troops are psychologically prepared, right? Instead of first saying, before we go any further, if you fit in these categories, please go home. It's first that you get the courageous speech, and then you're told to go home. It's almost as though it's a test, and it's a reminder that even in those moments where you feel drawn to a certain path, and in this case, as a warrior, the path would be you're standing there with all of your comrades and you are about to go into battle. You can imagine the adrenaline. And then after you are totally hyped up, then they say, but now we want you to take that intensity and we want you to bring it back to your home and take care of those things first. If you haven't done the things that are essential foundational components of what it means to build a community, if our community does not have people who have established homes, if we don't have a community that has established a financial system that can work for them, and if we have a community that doesn't prioritize families and loving relationships, then there is no community. Then there is nothing for us to fight for, as David seems to suggest, right? So use all of that intensity that we just hyped you up with and go take care of that first. And then, of course, there is that final character, which is the one who has no courage, that even after that rallying cry, there are those who may really not have the courage to go through this. And that seems to be a suggestion that when there are those we are surrounded with who are not up to the task, that can impact the entire group. Again, a community is impacted by those not only who are the strongest in the group, but also those who come off as the weakest. And you don't want those weak people to necessarily put the entire group at risk. And so it's better, according to our war tactics of our tradition, to take those people who are not yet ready to go into battle and let them go home, right? And I think we can expand this to battle, not just being the physical battles, of course, in the world, but how do we understand our place and other people's places in the fights that we are trying to participate in? And maybe there are people who are not ready for that fight. And this seems to suggest it's okay to let people know, you know what, if you're not ready for this fight, go home and wait until you're ready, and then come back and do what you can do. But if you try and give people a pass and if you know that someone's not up to something, and yet you allow them to pursue it, you could actually put the whole thing in jeopardy. That seems to be it's one of the suggestions. Abby, you had your hand up, and then I'll get to you, Jeff.
Well, I have the Jewish Study Bible, and I was looking at the commentary, and it's interesting because they say these three things, and I looked it up in 28, are the things that the Lord says he will take away from you and use as punishment if you don't believe in him. So, although here God is seemingly, saying, okay, the family, this is so important, but really what he's actually saying, belief in me is most important.
Yes, and the belief in this whole justice system that we are putting together in the Book of Deuteronomy and throughout the Torah, and if you don't abide by those, you will be cursed, right? There are a few passages throughout Deuteronomy that remind us that I set before you blessings and curses, and you have the choice. Do you want to choose blessings or do you want to choose curse? You
But
want to go down the path. Yeah, go ahead.
well, it just seems so, what can I say? So strong on each side. I'm going to give you this, but then I'm going to take it away from you. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, there's a big fear element that comes out in the way in which God talks to the Jewish people at many points throughout the tradition that is fear inducing, right?
Yeah.
And yirah, the word itself means fear and awe. So there's this link between both, and that yes, there is a strong. I mean, and the Book of Deuteronomy is, yes, it's Moses speaking, reminding people of a lot of the times their failures up until this point. And you could imagine God and Moses, and especially Moses, knowing that he's not going to be joining them in the land of Israel, which they're about to enter, a real anxiety about, are the Jewish people going to go down the same dark path that they've gone down over and over again throughout this 40-year journey, right? Where they've complained, where they have failed to live up to the ideals that God has set before them, even when they receive the Ten Commandments. You know, at the same time Moses is doing that, they're down there building a golden calf. So all of these reminders where you could imagine if God were a personality, that God would have an anxiety about, you know, you better, guys, this is no joke. You either follow my way or bad things are going to happen. And it's using fear tactics, which sometimes work and a lot of times don't, because the reality is God had used fear tactics throughout, and it didn't always stop people from doing what they're going to do. So yes, but a good point. Thank you, Abby. Any other thoughts on this passage, on these three categories, or the person who lacks courage, why that's included? Yeah, Jeff.
Just a question. Who was exempt from the service? Were the Levites not chosen warriors? Were the people who were in the yeshiva Hebrew bookers not allowed to fight because they were studying? I mean, not everybody was equally subject to the call. It's like
Yes.
earlier when Manasseh and Gad and the tribes were said, you will be the warriors. If I give you this land, you will have to come back and fight. There were selected tribes who were the warriors, but there were also exclusions, it seems. The Levites, the priests, the students who choose to be conscientious objectors, so to speak.
Yes, that is a good point. Okay. Any other thoughts on this one? No? Okay, well, let's continue. The next passage comes actually right after this. So this was 1 through 9. I split it up a little because it's slightly different. And this one is a smaller piece, but I wanted to focus more, I think, on the first passage there. When you approach a town to attack it, so now this is right after people have been told to go home if you fit these categories. When you approach a town to attack it, you shall offer it terms of peace. If it responds peaceably and lets you in, all the people present there shall serve you at forced labor. If it does not surrender to you, but would join battle with you, you shall lay siege to it. And when the Lord your God delivers it into your hand, you shall put all its males to the sword. You may, however, take as your booty the women, the children, the livestock, and everything in the town, all its spoil, and enjoy the use of the spoil of your enemy, which the Lord your God gives you. Okay, so this is one of those disturbing passages for us as modern Jews, though this was historically kind of the way things were done when people went into battle, that if you went and you attacked another town or another city, you would kill all the men, and then you would be able to keep everything else as your forced labor. And yet, what stood out to me was less that piece, and more the piece at the very beginning, which says, when you are going to attack a town, first you need to offer it peace, right? That even when you are about to engage in battle, and I think we could, again, I'd like to think of this as more than just the physical battlefield. Before we engage in battle, we first need to at least offer peace as an option. And then it's up to the other person whether or not they want to accept that. But this seems to be a suggestion that, again, even when you are ready to go into battle, you still need to offer peace one last time. And if so, yes, you are going to potentially, if you win, you can still then take them into forced labor, but you're not going to not only lose your own people, you're not going to lose your resources, you're not going to have to kill as many people, all of these things, so that there is still this idea that peace is still comes at the forefront, even when you are ready to go to battle with another. Abby, you had your hand up?
Well, actually, you said it in the second sentence, because although they offer peace, and I know you're trying to give a positive spin to it, I would like to too, but it says, then you'll be my slave. But it's true. This is a historical context. This is, that's how they did. They had wars. I mean, that basically the whole Hebrew Bible is about the wars and taking the spoils. And if God is with you, then you win. And if you don't win, it's because you haven't believed in him and done, all the commandments and blah, blah, blah. So yes. I don't know. I mean, it was the second sentence, and yes, it's true. And we have to sort of take it and make it what's right for us.
Yes, and as you suggest, I tend to look for the positive spin in most of these things, and that's not to negate the negative repercussions of some of these texts, nor am I suggesting that there aren't bad ways or negative ways that our tradition is presenting itself. And I actually think those are some of the best passages for us to study together, and in general. But in this case, I guess I'm leaning more towards hope these days, and really trying to find, even in those moments that are troubling, even in the passages that are very troubling for us, what is the lesson that we're supposed to learn that is supposed to develop us, that is the lessons that are not supposed to take us further down a path of negativity or violence or destruction, but instead are there elements of those seemingly on the surface negative things that can actually lead to positivity. But good point. Yeah, Jeff.
When you read the passage and it says, take the women and put them into slavery, I look at the faces of the women in this group and I see a reaction to that, this idea of women as property. They respond to it without them even knowing it, because they see the consequences of sex trafficking, of all of the ills that type of society at that time condoned as normal. And yet it exists here even today, and women see it. And even though they're not aware they're responding to it, when you watch them read that passage, you see that it has a much deeper meaning to them than it does to the males who are reading that same passage. That there is a empathy and an understanding about the horrors that type of servitude and subjugation has always led to. And it's, we haven't much improved, unfortunately. We call it different things, but we haven't improved very much.
See, and I would say that, going back to the first passage we looked at of Tzedek Tzedek Tirdof, that ideally we as a society need to get to a place that if we were all on this Zoom, that we all have the same reaction that you saw in some of the women, that even the men need to get to the place where everyone has a certain visceral reaction to injustice, regardless of their gender, right? That the ultimate goal that you are pointing out that we're not there yet, even though we're making strides, is you're right. We need to get to the place where there is empathy and understanding and a recognition of those injustices across all lines, so that we all have that reaction. So yeah, okay, let's go on. Oh yeah, go ahead, Susan.
Just
yeah.
one thing, I have to say, the men were killed. So it's not just women; the men got it too. And maybe it's because the men were warriors, but I mean, their lives were destroyed, and maybe the women were too, but I don't think it's totally a male-woman thing. I also think pursuing justice was the effort here to make peace first before. I think that's still a train And certainly that this applies so poignantly to our current situation of not legislatures not compromising. I mean, our country was founded on compromise. Anyone that reads the Federalist Papers and the arguments between Jefferson and Hamilton, and they were really at odds and they hated each other too, but they compromised, for God's sakes, and built an incredible nation. So, and they built it on Judaic principles too.
Great. Yes. As we read in the passage before, right? If tzedek is about peace, it's also about compromise. It's a very Jewish way of understanding how we are supposed to live in the world. We've talked about this in our Talmud class about debate and dialogue and compromise and discussion and disagreement. So here too, we have, as you point out, the first way to pursue justice is through the pathway of peace. That's the ultimate way forward, and that requires some compromise, whether it's on a battlefield, because if you're in a battlefield and you come and you offer peace, you're probably compromising something, right? There's probably some give and take that's going on there in order for the other party to be willing to surrender. So peace comes first, in the qualities of peace are the same types of qualities that we need to pursue in this idea of justice. Okay, I see we have about 20 minutes left. Let's get to the next section. Okay, so we're still in war. We're still dealing with war. And then we have this passage in just soon thereafter, Deuteronomy 20, verses 19 through 20. When in your war against a city, you have to besiege it a long time in order to capture it. You must not destroy its trees, wielding the axe against them. You may eat of them, but you must not cut them down. Are trees of the field human to withdraw before you into the besieged city? Or, another translation, for a human is like a tree to withdraw before you into the besieged city. Only trees that you know do not yield food may be destroyed. You may cut them down for constructing siege works against the city that is waging war on you until it has been reduced. Okay, so we have here, are trees of the field human to withdraw before you into the besieged city? Why is this passage focusing on the trees and the fact that you cannot cut down fruit-bearing trees when you are at war? Of all the things, why this? Why is this being called out in the Torah in this section about war? What's significant from your own perspective, right? And we'll look at a few interpretations in a minute, but your own perspective, why would our tradition be calling that out based on your own understanding of trees, or however your own interpretation? Yes, Susan.
Yes, they're life-sustaining. But interestingly, they point out the food. Trees that have food on them are the ones. Don't cut them down. We want to, hopefully after the war, to replenish the earth and to save lives. And trees that bear food have that. It's also important that we know now for shade and for global warming, but I don't know that they had global warming then. But I always think of trees as my friends of life-sustaining, giving shade, and I've always loved them. So I get that here.
Right, and think about the first tree that we learn about is the tree in the garden in Adam and Eve in the garden. Think about the Torah service. Every time we put the Torah back in the ark, it's Chaim Chilema, right? There's a passage from Proverbs which is it is the tree of life to them who hold it fast, and all of its supporters are happy, right? And that's the passage we say every time we put the Torah back in the ark. The scrolls, what we hold on to when we lift a Torah or we hold the Torah are called the Eitzei Chaim, right? The trees of life are the two different poles of the Torah scroll itself. So the symbol of the tree is very significant, and here I think the Torah is playing into the power of what a tree represents, as Susan said, the shade. If you think about roots of a tree and the fact that roots go, I think somewhere I read, either they are as tall, if not taller, than the tree itself. So whatever's above ground of the tree, the roots are actually just as deep or as tall, if not taller than that. So you can imagine,
and they
especially
go from the earth where we are to heaven. So they're like Jacob's ladder as well. So.
Yes, right. And so there's significance in this tree. And on the base level, of course, there is this idea that you want to be able to have food to eat. You want your troops to have food to eat as you're continuing to go to battle, because this is a long process. You want the town that you are overtaking to have the opportunity to have food when this battle is over. So that's on one level, and then we start to get to these deeper connections of what the tree is. And I think that's one of the great things about when we study Torah, when we can ask, why specifically this? What is the Torah trying to teach us about ourselves, or about the human condition, or about how we're supposed to understand our connection to the planet, as Susan pointed out with global warming, right? That what is our responsibility to the earth, even in a time where we are focused on destroying each other? We can't destroy the earth in the process, right? That if you want to take an environmental lens to what this passage is suggesting, is that don't let, as the passage suggests, is the tree like a human that can flee? No. Why are you going to take out the destruction that you want to bring to to humanity? Why are you bringing that to the earth that can't defend itself in the same way? That your responsibility, even in the process of destroying something else, is to defend and protect the earth and the elements that give us, brilliantly, they didn't know about the fact that oxygen comes from trees, that we need trees in so many different ways, and yet they did know. Right? So the brilliance of our tradition thousands of years ago to be able to tap into the key elements of what sustains us, I think is always incredible. Any thoughts on trees before we look at some of the interpretations? Yeah, Jeff.
It's not just trees. Remember, God's thrust in sending the Israelites to Canaan was he was angry that the entire land and all it contained was defiled and made impure. That every action of destroying the 7 tribes that lived there related to purifying again the land which was so important to him. And all the features of the land are equally important to God. It wasn't the people that were important. It was their actions as they affected the land. For God's home, let's say, or his attitude towards that land was something very special.
Right, and it's linked into, as we talked about earlier, the types of people who are supposed to go home and stop battle before they go into battle. They have to go home and take care of the things that are related to the land, the foundational elements, not just of a community, but of our livelihood, right? And what it means to actually be connected to that land, that our connection to the land is a dominant feature of what it means for us to be successful in the world and for us to thrive as humans. Okay, so let's look at some of the interpretations of this. From the Shulchan Aruch, which is a law code, a rabbinic law code, just as one must be careful with his body so as not to destroy it or ruin it or harm it, so too one needs to be careful with his property so as not to destroy or ruin or harm it. Anyone who smashes utensils or tears clothing or breaks down a building or clogs a well or destroys food or drinks or spoils them or throws out money, and likewise one who ruins any other thing which is fit for human beings to make use of, he transgresses against a Torah prohibition, as it is stated, do not destroy its trees. Okay, so the Shulchan Aruch is linking this one line, do not destroy its trees, to the law, really, that we can't be destructive at all. We are not supposed to be destructive with property or objects. That destroying the trees is really representative, if we go back to what we talked about earlier, it's Chaim, this idea of the tree of life, that the tree represents livelihood and life itself. That anyone who goes out and purposefully is destructive, right? That would be destroying anything for no reason, or when you're really mad, you destroy something. No, this is suggesting that is in an inappropriate way to go go about anything, right? That we are not supposed to destroy things, and we're not supposed to take out our anger or our rage in a way that leads to destruction of property or humans or livelihood. Any thoughts on this one? Okay, so then let's go to the next one. This is another tshuva, which is like a teaching or a law. And this one, it's a little longer, so we're not going to spend tons of time on it, but I do want you to as we're reading through it, what do you think it's trying to teach us? And why? What is the link between the passage from Deuteronomy that it starts out with and what they then continue to talk about throughout this passage? So, you must not destroy its trees, wielding the axe against them. For we were warned with this not to cut down any fruit tree, even to build fortifications with it, so as long as one finds enough fruitless trees for his needs. And we were also warned with this not to throw money around for no reason, even the value of a pruta, a small coin. And our rabbi said, one who rends his garments excessively over his dead relative is lashed. And all the more so one who breaks vessels in his anger, as he has done two evils, destroying his wealth and letting his anger be in control to make him transgress matters of the Torah. As from now on, he will have a struggle with the impulse of anger to make him transgress his religion, like the matter that is written, a hot-tempered man commits many offenses. And we have already let you know that which our rabbis, may their memory be blessed, said, one who breaks his vessels in his anger should be like an idol worshiper in your eyes, as that is the way of the evil impulse. Today it tells him, do this, and tomorrow it tells him, worship idols. And our rabbis, may their memory be blessed, said, a man should not pour out water from his well when others need it. We were even warned not to waste the body by giving it over to dangers or torturing the body to consume it needlessly with fasts from his distress and anger, and not to mourn more than is necessary for his dead relative. But regarding one who grieves and mourns over his iniquities, about him it is stated, I note how they fare and will heal them. I will guide them and mete out solace to them and to the mourners among them. And it is stated, but for your soul's blood I will require a reckoning. And our rabbis, may their memory be blessed, said, from the hand of your souls will I require your blood. Okay, there's a lot there. We could spend a lot of time just unpacking all of that. But in that very quick reading, what's that about? What are they doing with that passage? Do not destroy trees and bring an axe against them. What are they doing with that passage, and what are they trying to teach us? Yeah, Susan.
Well, they're extending the anger and frustration to to destroying other things. I mean, utensils, for goodness sakes. But I think of the recent riots that occurred. And I lived through earlier riots in the 90s, and how much that anger was unleashed, some in the Watts, and then the next one down there among their own community. And this is such a
bad comment.
What?
No, nothing. I'm sorry. I was thinking of something else. I apologize.
It's such a warning about the excesses of anger and where it can lead as well. And it's like a fence around the Torah. This is a fence around the releasing of your anger. And again, this still is justice. That's an injustice that we're dealing with the theme of justice, an injustice that is committed when you don't seek compromise or an appropriate outlet for your anger.
Great, thank you. Yeah, Jeff.
I think the warning in this passage is one about us, that the restrictions that occur and the damage that occurs because we are reactive people is the problem. That being proactive, being somewhat reserved in action as things become known to you, is what it's trying to say the goal is. That we are unfortunately reactive people, and we create so much harm and damage by being reactive instead of proactive, that it's a word of caution that these acts don't yield justice or a solution. They yield greater problems being in the reactive mode. That humans, unfortunately, for the most part, tend to be reactive. There are very few proactive, thoughtful, introspectives who can function at that level continuously, regardless of what society throws at them. So
Good.
try to prevent yourself from reacting.
Good. And I think that this is why I think this whole passage is focused on the second part of that line from Deuteronomy, right? Because it is. Let me see if I can get out of this now. It is saying that because it could have just said, well, you must not destroy its trees. Could have ended there. But the Torah added this after the comma, wielding the axe against them, right? Why does it need to say that? Why couldn't it just say, don't destroy its trees, don't destroy the fruit bearing ones? Why does the Torah then add this phrase, wielding the axe against them? Because wouldn't we assume that you use an axe to cut down a tree for the most part? So I think what has been alluded to, and what I think the rabbis are trying to articulate and focus on, is not in this passage, not just the destroying the trees part, but the fact that wielding the axe against them, that is a brutal force. They're highlighting the way in which you destroy something, and then they go on to talk about the different ways in which we wield axes, right? The way in which we take our anger and we use it destructively, and how we have to be very careful of how we use our anger, and that it destroys more than just the property or whatever it is that is being destroyed itself. It impacts us. It impacts a whole variety of people. So that there are a lot of elements that are built into that. Okay, and finally, we're going to end with this, which I think is a beautiful little passage, also along with trees, from the Talmud again. Tree, tree, with what can I bless you? That your fruit may be sweet, it is already sweet. That you should give plenty of shade, that you also do. That a spring of water may be near you, even that you have. The one thing left me which I can wish for you is that all trees planted from your seed may be as fruitful as you are. I think it's a beautiful passage and a beautiful sentiment about what a blessing that I think all of us should be blessing ourselves with and blessing each other with is this idea that beyond the ability to bring shade and comfort and sustenance, that one of the most impactful blessings that we can bring is our legacy, is the next generation, is what we pass on, and that what we should be encouraging, and that one of the most important ways in which we bring justice into the world is to take our love, our pursuit of peace, always, even in a wartime, to start with peace, this idea of compromise, and that we may pass on to the next generation the best of what we have and the best of what we have to offer. That our seed and our legacy, whether that is in human form or whether that is through our teachings and our wisdom, however it is that we pass on who we are at our core to the next generation, the real blessing is, can we do that in a way that is even better and is fruitful in all ways possible to bring about more peace and justice into the world. So that's my blessing to all of you and to all of us in the world this Shabbat, and as we go into the month of Elul and get closer to the high holidays. So thank you all. Thank you for all your comments and insights, and Shabbat Shalom. I hope you have a wonderful Shabbos, and you should be on the lookout. We're going to be sending out something every day, a little teaching about Elul. Also, to give you a heads up, we haven't put it out yet, but because we're going to be doing our high holidays virtually this year, we did want to create some way where those of you who live in town, since I know some of you here don't live in town, but those who live in town, we are going to have a sign up for people to take 10 minutes of their own private time in the sanctuary, at our gorgeous sanctuary, with the clergy on standby for you if you want them or not, but for 10-minute increments for family units or individuals to come in. And I don't know how many of you have been in that sanctuary alone when there aren't thousands of people there, but it's a very powerful place. And so I urge you to take advantage of that when the information comes out, if you want to have at least some connection to that physical space when we are going to be virtual in every other aspect of our high holidays this year. So with that, thank you again, and Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat
See you all
shalom.
Shabbat
soon.
Shalom, Rabbi. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Miriam, did you need anything specifically? I can't hear you. You're muted. Top right.
I muted myself the whole
There you
time.
go. Now I can hear you.
Good. I muted myself. I didn't want my phone to ring on the call, which didn't happen. But you know, when you're not muted, you hear everybody's phone. That's kind of
Did you
I
need
hear.
anything specifically
So I
from me?
wanted to talk to you about talk on the phone. You said you were alone there, and you're getting all this huge benefit from the temple. It means every dollar that you get from us in order to pay 4 or 5 full-time rabbis, in order to keep the highest standard that Boulevard does, and to feel that every several times you're gaining and gaining so much from this temple, but kind of
You're
refuse to
You're cutting in and out.
Okay.
So
And kind of like you feel like you participate financially, a penny, not to be part of the reason that you're able to be here and that I'm able to be here and that we're all able to be here. It's something to talk on the phone. Have a nice Shabbat.
thank you. You too, Miriam.
I want you to give it some thought.
Well, you're
So
better
the
off.
temple will take anything that you want to donate.
I see.
But
Okay.
to sit and not feel that you honestly want to inside of you donate something to keep this fantastic organization going. It only works on our donations. The rabbis had only paid on our donations. The temple cannot exist. And therefore, whatever anybody feels they want to give to this temple, to let it keep on existing, be a major part of their thinking, I think. I don't mean to sound intrusive. It's not any of my business. If you don't care to give one penny to this temple, it's up to you. But personally, I feel that's how our organizations, nonprofit organizations exist by our donations, whether they're very big donations, very meager donations, the temple will accept.
You are definitely an advocate of the temple. There's no
No,
question
of
about
any
that.
temple, but especially this.
And
This
all
one-
three of the temples here that I'm involved with offer the same,
And you
appeal.
chose not to belong to.
Well, that's part of my deficits, and
Well, that's how they could be their deficit too, if they have to close up a lot of people.
it's not that I don't support them in many ways, but I choose to support them with things that I think are important. And there are funds and there are, different ways to give to certain aspects of the temple without necessarily, being whole hog and supporting one, the other, or ever. I choose to spread things around in small portions and do it for very specific reasons. So, I appreciate your zealousness for this temple, and I hope that I bring something to the discussion. and make it worthwhile being there as well. So we'll,
I think what you say, Jeff, allow the temple to exist.
I didn't hear that.
We appreciate what you have to say during these meetings, Jeff, very much, but that doesn't help the temple exist in a financial need. Okay, dear. I won't phone you. I said what I have to. Goodbye,
All
sir.
right,
Take
Miriam.
care. Take care.
Love you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, sweetheart. Jill, are you there too?